how did we get to the point where it's told to everybody that we need 2 incomes to survive, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's a new thing. It was never like that in all of human history prior to about 1980 is really when things changed. And that's because from 1960 to 1980, the workforce almost doubled because of participation in the labor force by women, by married women and mothers who previously rarely were in the labor force. So if we're talking about the early 20th century prior to suffrage, it was a very tiny amount of women who were married that worked outside the home. It was only about 12%. So once you got married, it was kind of expected you would stay home and you'd probably be a mom. And then that number began to rise more and more as the 20th century went on and as women's liberation propaganda got out there. And then World War II happened. And we had a lot of women go into the workforce to cover for men who had gone to the war. But after the war, most of them went back home.
And that was what, the 40s?
Yes, that was the late 40s. And the 60s is when things really started to change because the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation started to create women's studies departments in universities, and they put massive amounts of funding into women's suffrage propaganda and women's liberation propaganda, telling women that, you know, it's very risky to be married and you should have your own money and you should have your own credit because what if he leaves you or what if he becomes an abuser? Suddenly that abuse mode just flips on one day and he becomes like this awful man and then you're trapped, right? And you even saw a lot of that in pop culture in the 70s with movies like the Stepford Wives and there was a bunch of them. There's a whole series of movies that came out that made it seem like being a stay-at-home wife and mom was like boring and unfulfilling, that being a career woman was exciting and cool.